So, I'm going to discuss my experience of being a Latino Muslim and a lot of the transition that takes effect within the household and externally. Now, when I converted to Islam, I, you know, at first I had to understand the social and cultural dynamics of living in America and how different that was from the Middle East. Um, but it's extremely different. The cultures. I studied Clash of Civilization, and it discusses how there is a Francis Fukuyama who explained how culture wars were to exist, and so um, the history of America, for example, of the founding fathers, um, in creating a system that's based on the nature God and natural law compared to the laws of the messengers and also Freemasonry. And so when the founding fathers created the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, they took into consideration all these aspects because when they were leaving Great Britain and settling here, they fundamentally had to change and protect the new settlements. So the British king was waging war against the newly settlements of the U.S., colonial settlements of Great Britain, and therefore they needed a transition of taxation, meaning that they didn't want to be taxed when they were basically uh, ignored for pretty much all their needs, especially when they were going to war against native indigenous Indians. So during that period of time and that transition, um, America was creating its own identity, and the founding fathers didn't want to have predominantly a religious structure. So many of them were influenced by Aristotle um, and a lot of the ideas and theology of Rome. Now, both Britain and Russia are heavily influenced by Byzantine, but through that transition, um, the British settlers were also influenced by Byzantine. So when America, the new nation, was created, it fundamentally needed to also create its own identity, its own faith system, and to protect itself from European um, economic and spiritual um, spiritual influences. So predominantly, Europe was Christendom, and Europe had its revolutions. And so when Puerto Ricans started to migrate to the U.S., they were under Christendom. Um, when Christendom and the Spanish Empire was in full control of its colonies, America waged war against Spain. In this war, America overthrew a form of Christendom that was coming from the Pope and Europe and influence and taking over one of its colonies, which was Puerto Rico in the Spanish American War. And so later on, Puerto Ricans ended up migrating to the U.S. as believers. But the system in the U.S. was built to protect itself from political and economic leadership of believers, which is either Christians, Judaism, and Islamic influences. Although many of the founding fathers still had um, influences regarding these spiritual religions, um, this transition was still there and prominent. And so as Puerto Ricans started to come and populate inside the U.S., um, many Puerto Ricans felt disenfranchised in two ways. One, that they became part of a new colony, and second was the fact that they became Puerto Ricans became part of a new empire, yet they didn't have any say in the first empire that ruled over them. So the second empire that came to rule over them, they pretty much were they didn't really have much to say in regards to its politics or economics, because they again were imposed another government. And so many Puerto Ricans over the years felt frustrated and wanted to have their own form of system. So eventually, many Puerto Ricans started to use Santeria, which came from Africa because of the slaves taken to Puerto Rico, trying to overthrow Christendom, or the form of Christendom, the Inquisition of Christendom, because it was a form of oppression. It was a land reform, taxation, um, different system that came about. And so a lot of Puerto Ricans had the feel of resistance towards that form of spiritual colonial oppression. And so while studying, I came to find that Islam was already struggling against that form of Christendom. And this was in parts of Spain when the Muslim Moors were fighting against the Crusades. And so this is kind of like the transitional periods of that time. So later it came to be that, I started to read and see how much spirituality really played a key role in defining colonialism. So imperialism with faith systems, and was predominantly the reason why I became Muslim. Um, but I will talk about this next time in much greater detail whenever I have the chance. But those are some of the reasons why I became Muslim, and how being a Muslim and its acceptance in Latin America, it's very difficult because Latin America itself stems from another form of resistance towards Christendom, towards the Crusades that came from Spain. So many Latin Americans see also the believers movement as more of a form of oppression than liberation. But I will get into that in more detail next time.